Welcome back to Making Multifamily Money. So today I want to announce that I'm creating a 10 to 20 video series about mobile home parks. Each video is roughly going to be around 10 minutes. And for a lot of you who don't know, I own 90 units, 5 single family homes, which is where I started. Then I went to apartment complexes. I own a 26 unit and a 20 unit, which I'm doing heavy value add on right now. And on top of that, I also own a 200 lot mobile home park in Alabama. I don't really talk much about it because I'm still putting a lot of time and effort and learning about it and, getting a lot of experience and scars along the way. I've owned the mobile home park for around a little over a year now. I think like about 15 months. I got it at the end of 2021 and just wanted to kind of share my experience and feedback. Like a lot of us, what got me interested in mobile home parks was listening to Bigger Pockets podcast. Brandon Turner, who was the co-host, he was a really big advocate of mobile home parks. I also listened to Kevin Bubb's podcast, which talks about mobile home parks, and then there's obviously a Frank and Dave's Boot Camp, which talks about mobile home parks. So, if you listen to any of those podcasts, what you would know and what I knew initially about mobile home parks is it's very appealing because number one, it's affordable housing. And what they mean by affordable housing is to bring in a brand new 3 bedroom, 2 bath, single wide from True Homes, which is probably the cheapest model you can get. It's going to be roughly around $40,000, including setup. So it's $35,000 for the home, and then about $5,000 to set up skirting, installation, connecting up utilities, adding a little porch deck, just setting everything up and all the labor. So all in, it's $40,000. And at that point, you can either sell the home for like a 10% profit if you're using the 21st mortgage cash program, which is very popular, or you can get 100% finance as a rental and then rent that out. So that's what I mean by affordable housing. So, for some context, it's let's say $40,000 for a brand new mobile home. The average cost of a single family home in Alabama is $150,000. So it's 1/3 the cost, right? So it's very affordable. In terms of the monthly payments, so let's just say if they were to rent it, it'd be $700 a month. And that's a 3 bedroom, 2 bath. In Alabama, to rent a 2 bedroom, 1 bath, it's around $700 to $800. So as you can see, you get an additional bedroom for around the same price as a 2 bedroom apartment. But the perks is you don't have someone living above you, below you, and you're not sharing walls with anybody. You have your own house. You have your own little parking spot, so you can pull your car right up, take all your groceries out, whatever you need, put in your house. It's like you have your own house, right? So that's the appeal of the mobile home park industry, is that it's affordable housing, but you still can maintain the semblance of either owning the house. It's very achievable, but also just having your own space, having your own privacy, and the next home is maybe 6 to 8 feet over, so you do have your privacy. And number two is it gives the dream of home ownership. It's really attainable to blue collar, white collar workers. So a lot of these tenants, they might work at like Walmart, for example, like a super Walmart, and they're getting paid minimum wage of, let's just say, $15 an hour. That's $30,000 a year roughly. And for those type of people, they can actually qualify um, to buy these homes, right? Like it's if you get a house for let's say $40,000, usually when you sell it, you do a 10% markup, so selling for $45,000. And let's say they need 10% down, that's $4,500. So when tax season comes around the corner, which it's soon, they might get a lump sum of close to 10%, and they'll just put in an application through 21st Mortgage, Vanderbilt. There's Triad. There's many different lenders out there, and they'll tell you immediately if you qualify or not. And if you don't qualify, then you might just have to increase your down payment a little bit. So for $4,500, you have the dream of ownership. It's pretty attainable. The third thing that's popular about mobile home parks is if you have a tenant-owned home model, so the tenants own their home and they just pay you lot rent, the operating expense is roughly between 35 to 40%. So it's a lot easier, right? Versus in apartment complexes, I own 2 of them. Remember, it's roughly between 50 to 55% of the operating expense of the income goes to expenses. So yeah, you have a lower expense ratio with tenant-owned home mobile home parks. So that's another appeal, right? So if you're grossing, let's just say $100,000, the expenses would be $35,000. Versus in apartment complexes, if you're grossing $100,000, your expense is $50,000. So that's an appeal as well. And the other appeal is if the tenants own their own homes and just pay a lot rent, it's a lot less maintenance, right? Like if a water heater breaks down, if a window breaks, um, obviously the tenant is responsible for doing it themselves. If you're not responsible, whereas an apartment, if anything breaks, I have to go in and fix it, right? They put in a request, my handyman comes in and they'll fix it. So the cost is on me as the owner. So, you know, and it can be a lot more passive in that sense. Like you're just kind of enforcing the rules. Like, okay, is there no big dogs? Are you parking junk cars in front of the house? Are you maintaining your house well? Um, the fourth thing that's really nice with mobile home parks is it's really, really a lot of tax benefits. Like if you were to use a park owned home model where you own the homes as a landlord and you rent them out, basically you can write off those homes with a bonus depreciation. So let's say I bought a brand new home for $45,000. I can usually write off that $45,000 up front. So if you times that by like 10 homes, that's $450,000 of write off just from the homes, right? And then anytime you do any infrastructure upgrades, um, it's a big tax write off as well. So that's another appeal of mobile home parks. The fifth appeal of mobile home parks is, if you can infill new homes. So let's just say you have like for me, I own a 200 lot mobile home park, and I think 150 lots are vacant right now. If I can fill in all 150 of those homes with new homes to sell it or rent it out, it really forces the value of the park to go up significantly. So, for example, if this park was full, like all 200 lots are full, the park would easily be worth $10 million. But obviously it's gonna be a lot of work and a lot of time to get there. But that's what's really nice is that you can create a system where you coordinate. You buy the home, gets made. It takes about maybe 3 to 4 weeks to get made. It gets delivered by a mover, and they get the coordinate of an installer, and then the installer will then set it up. And at that point, you have to connect the utilities, do the skirting at the deck. So the whole process from start to finish, from when the home is installed, or it takes 4 weeks to build it, and another maybe 4 to 6 weeks to get it fully set up that's rentable or sellable to a tenant. So if you can do that, it's a really easy value add that you can do. I know a lot of operators will say that they'll come in and raise the lot rents from like 250 to 300, but the reality is a lot of these people are fixed income, and it might be a big pill for them to swallow that. So it sounds easy, but in reality, the execution might be a little bit harder. Number 6 is the tenants are sticky, especially if they own the homes. It costs roughly between $5,000 to $7,000 to move your home from one mobile home park to another mobile home park. And a lot of these tenants do not want to spend that money to do that. They'd rather just, fix the home, or if they move, they just renovate the home and then sell it to someone else. And then someone else will pay the lot rent. So because of that, the tenants are very sticky. The next, I think number 7, I'm on number 7. It's pride of ownership. So, obviously they own their homes. You would assume that they take better care of their homes. So you don't have much turnover. It's very stable income. And, I think the last one is it's owned by a lot of mom and pop operators. There's a lot of seller financing opportunities. Obviously if you can get a good deal, get seller finance, so no banks are involved, no lenders are involved. It closes a lot faster. And I think I forgot what number I'm on, but the last bonus tip that I had was why people like mobile home parks is if you have extra land, there's potential to develop and add more units as well. So you take all those bullet points. This is why mobile home parks are very appealing, and a lot of people go from apartments to mobile home parks. I did that obviously. But I kind of hope to shed some light as to kind of my thoughts as to my experience that I've been, obviously a lot of scars owning my 200 lot mobile home park. So I hope you enjoy this 10-part series. Thank you. Welcome back to the channel. So this is part 2 of my mobile home park series. So I want to talk about my mobile home park. So I owned a 200 lot mobile home park. I bought it at the end of 2021. It's located in the southeast in Alabama, and I got it for $1.1 million. I put 10% down, and it's a huge, highly distressed, huge value add park. So let me kind of give you some context. So when I got the park, I believe there were 30 homes on the park. 15 homes were tenant owned. The average lot rent was ranging between, I think, as low as $150 a month, all the way up to $250. For that market, the top lot rent is probably around $300. And I had another 15 homes where they were rented out. So it was park owned homes. And the rent that I was getting was roughly around, I think, $500. So a little bit more than double of what the lot rent was. And so obviously that's what, 30 homes, and there's 200 lots. So there's 170 lots. So this is a huge value add play. It's over 55 acres, which is a lot of land. There's a lot of trees. There's a lot of grass. Probably another video talking about this later. But when I saw the park, I saw a lot of potential. There were a lot of just vacant homes sitting, on lots. I think there were roughly around 50 homes, I want to say, where they were vacant, and they need repair. So, they were fixable. And probably another 20 homes where they need to be completely torn down. So, as I said, obviously it's going to be a huge value add play, but obviously, if I can, fill up this park, it's going to be worth over $10 million, but it's going to take like at least 5 years to get this done. Let's say, assume that so I basically have 170 lots to fill over 5 years, which is what, over 30 homes a year, which is what, 2-3 homes a month. So, that's going really fast, right? Or other exit strategy would be I just improve the model, or maybe I can start bringing in some new homes, fix up some homes, and then sell it to a larger operator who can take it all the way, right? So there are multiple exit strategies that you can do. Obviously, if I can do it myself and fill all 200 lots, I can make the most money. But if, let's just say, I hit a point where I've proven the plan and the system, like I fixed up homes, I brought in some new homes, and then I proved that I can sell it, that I can rent it, and I can share that plan with a larger operator, and then they can come in with a lot of capital and bring it all the way, or I can bring partners in and they can help me bring it all the way. So that's what's nice about the park. I just like that there's many exit strategies. That's what I advocate in general. But back to the park. So basically, there were like a lot of vacant homes that are sitting there that need to be repaired, and a lot of like 20 homes that need to be torn down. And, so that's what got me really interested. It was, I think, city water, city sewer. I think maybe 6 lots were on septic. But for the most part, it was public utilities. The electricity was direct billed to the homes. So the tenants paid their own electricity. There were, lights throughout the 55 acres, which I was responsible for. The water was master metered, so I paid for all the water. The trash, I had to have a large dumpster, which I paid for, and then each tenant had their own trash can, which the landlord had to pay for. And yeah, I just thought it was, kind of crazy that I could buy a 55 acre, 200 lot mobile home park for $1 million. And, I'm from California, and I was buying single family homes for, $1 million plus. So that really intrigued me. But what really got me excited was the upside potential. Obviously, if it's worth about $1 million with 30 homes filled, once I start fixing up homes and bringing in new homes, like, the upside can be amazing, right? It's like astronomical, like $10 million plus. So that really appealed to me with that. And with this park, since it was, basically pretty distressed as a large turnaround, your only two options were, seller financing, or you get a hard money loan or like a bridge loan. So fortunately for me, I was actually able to get seller financing. The owner owned it free and clear. So basically, I negotiate 10% down. He carried a loan of, I think, around $1 million at 5% interest only for 6 years, and I deferred payments for the first year. Um, and add on to the back end of the loan. So what's nice about credit financing is you can pick your terms, right? Like I'm giving you 10% down, which is less, like 100,000 down. I can defer the interest payments. I think the annual interest payments were about $50,000 a year. So I deferred the first $50,000. So I can allocate that $50,000 towards fixing up the park. And yeah, that's kind of how I got started. I just said, this is insane. It's, $1 million, and let me try to go through it and see how it goes. So, if it's $1 million purchase price, that's 200 lots. I think that's what, around $5,000 to $6,000 per lot, which is crazy, right? Like for some context, it costs around, I'd say $20,000 to $30,000 to develop a new lot. So the fact that I can buy it, $5,000 to $6,000 per lot, made it seem cheaper. When I was evaluating the property, it was very difficult. Obviously with, you know, 30 units occupied, 15 tenant owned and 15 park owned home. And, this park had a lot of tenants who were not paying, right? Both in the tenant owned home and the park owned home. Um, so, obviously the income wasn't very strong. I think like the first month that I took over, I was only collecting $6,000, $7,000 a month. And so obviously when you're underwriting it, you're not going to underwrite and say, oh, I'm making 10% cash on cash return day one, like my mobile or my apartments. I underwrote my apartments. I'm making between 10% cash on cash return day one, but this large, huge value add mobile home park, um, you're not going to have any cash flow day one. It's probably going to be bleeding money, right? Like, between all your fixed expenses, right? There's a lot of fixed expenses when owning 55 acres, which I'll go in another video. But at a high level, that's what kind of appealed me to this deal, was that I could come in. I knew I was buying it right. $5,000 to $6,000 per lot was cheap. I can easily flip this and sell this for maybe $8,000 to $10,000 per lot, and kind of come out with money out the gate. Or I could, prove the model and then pitch it to a syndicator, or a partner of a larger syndicator who has more capital to help me bring the deal all the way. So I had multiple exit strategies in mind because I wanted to minimize my downside. Because, like you said, when you go in, and believe me, how I was 15 months ago to how I am today, my mindset completely changed about mobile home parks. So that's why I'm sharing this journey. But this is part one, or part two, just showing about, how I got the home. So hope to see you in the next video. Thank you. Welcome back to the Mobile Home Park series. Hopefully you found value from part 1, 2, and 3. This is actually part 4. So in the first one, I talked about why mobile home parks, why people like it. The second one, I talked about my mobile home park. And then the third part, I talked about the due diligence process for my mobile home park. So in part 4, I want to talk about like what to expect when you take over the park, right? And this applies to, apartments as well. But when I took over the park, I want to hit the ground running, right? I already had my performer plan in place. I wanted to renovate, 2 to 3 homes a month. I wanted to start with the homes that are easier fixes that cost around maybe $2,000 to $3,000 first, and then eventually get to the part where I'm to rent those out immediately to get more cash flow. And then slowly move on to the larger renovations, which were around $10,000. At that point, those would take a lot longer. But if I rent out the easiest ones first, it would get me more cash flow so that I can keep on going, right? And then while doing that, I wanted to tear down roughly between maybe 1 or 2 homes, per month to kind of clean up the park, so you can attract the higher quality tenant. So there's a lot of things that need to go on, right? So that was kind of one part that I had to do. On top of that, when you take over the park, you can switch all the utilities under your name. So I had to switch Alabama Power to my name. The water company as well. You have to put down a deposit to change when you change ownership. I think the deposit was like $7,000, and so that's what we did immediately. So when I took over, typically the property manager is a little bit quiet. There's a lot of like changing of hands and all that, and you have to set up my bank account. So I used Wells Fargo because there's Wells Fargo here in California, and then there's Wells Fargo in Alabama. So usually some mobile home parks they might only have like a local credit union. So if that's the case, when you're actually on site doing your due diligence, at that point, if they require you to be in person, you should start setting up your business bank accounts at that moment. But if you do see like a Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase, those national chains, obviously you can do it where you live, and then uh, your property manager will deposit the money into the local branch over there. So fortunately, I had a Wells Fargo. I just Googled it. I saw it. The prior owner was doing it. So once we took over the park, it was very seamless because then they'd be able to pay, the property manager. They get paid on a weekly basis. The contractors get paid on a weekly basis. So, when I took over the park, like I said, we hit the ground running. Utility switched to my name, and immediately we started renovating the. I had a crew of 5 people. So fortunately, my property manager, he actually used to be an electrician by trade, and typically the property manager will live on site, so they get free lot rent, and then you'll. I think I was paying him around maybe $2,000 a month to manage the park. So he would help do some like repairs. He'd collect the rent. It was a husband and wife duo. So the husband was more of a handyman, and then the wife would do all the paperwork. The rent collection. So this is usually how it was. So kind of when you're paying somebody $2,000 a month, which is $24,000 a year, the quality of property manager you'll get may not be the strongest. Obviously, when you can afford to pay $50,000 to $60,000, it's a lot better. But to initially save money, and I think what was nice was he was a handyman as well, and we needed that for this heavy distress park. So he was helping with that, and we also had another part-time maintenance guy that was kind of helping the property manager mow the lawn. So when you have 55 acres, obviously it's a full-time job just to mow the lawns. Once you finish mowing one side of the 55 acres, you have to restart again. And it takes like a week to do that. And the grass grows very fast, especially during the rainy seasons. They have a lot of crabweed in Alabama, and that thing can grow from like 0 to 5 feet, in like 2 months if you don't like maintain it. So obviously we had the property manager there, and then he used to like run his own little construction company, so he knew a lot of guys who were willing to work for like maybe 10 to 12 bucks an hour to fix up these homes. So they would actually live in one of the homes. They would actually pay me rent, and then they would then get paid on a weekly basis to fix up the homes. So it was kind of nice, right? They would live in the home, but then they would also pay me rent, but then they also fix up the homes, and that would pay them. So upon that, I immediately had to uh, buy an excavator. So the excavator costed around, I think, $37,000. Fortunately, you can finance it. So I think I could finance it where it was $700 a month. And to rent an excavator for a day would be around $300 a day. So I figured if I use it more than 3 days a month, then it's actually worth it to consider buying it and financing it. So that's exactly what I did, because I would need to use it every day, right? Because when you're tearing down homes, you need an excavator. When you're doing plumbing repair, you need an excavator. And and I had all the above, right? Like I had a lot of 20 homes to demolish. I had 500 feet of plumbing to fix. I definitely knew I was going to need it. And the moment you don't need it anymore, you can sell it. And so that was my strategy, was to have it so that things can get fixed immediately. So I was able to finance it through Wells Fargo, actually, and it's $70 monthly payments. I had to buy a new lawnmower. So they were using like your typical lawnmower handheld one from Home Depot, but when you own 55 acres, you need like a commercial grade one. So I was able to get one for, I think it was like around $4,000. But what was nice was I got it financed over, I think, 4 years, and it was 0% interest. So my monthly payment was around $180 a month. So I had to get that. And on top of that, I had to, unfortunately, hire security. because of a lot of these vacant park owned homes, a lot of homeless people, a lot of vagrants, transients will occupy those homes sometimes, because it's been vacant for so long. They'll just kind of sneak in at night. So I had to hire, kind of part time security to, number one, help with rent collections. It's a little more intimidating when you have a security guard collecting rent, so it helps with collections. Number two is they can kind of rotate through different hours of the nighttime to make sure that there's no like vandalism at the park. There's no homeless people or vagrants trying to go into the park on the homes. And by having the security there, it did prevent a lot of trouble. Like they did, uh, they work with the local police department. They would do citizens arrest, and then call the cops to do that. So it did kind of show that I wanted to take care of the tenants and make the park a better community, safe affordable housing for families to live in. So basically had to hire that. And so as you can kind of see, all these fixed expenses go up, right? Like there's a lot of fixed expense um, when you're managing 55 acres. I wasn't really quite aware of that. Like you just need someone almost full time, 40 hours a week just mowing the lawn. And what's nice about having your own, lawnmower that you're paying on payroll is that when my property manager needs help fixing something, because sometimes you need two people to do stuff, he can hop off his lawnmower and then come help him with things here and there, right? Versus we hire a landscaping company, they just come in, do their job, and leave, right? They don't really help. So that's why I wanted to have someone on site there that could help the property manager to get things done a little faster. But as you can see, all these fixed expenses going up, right? So, having the dumpster, every time you empty the dumpster through Alabama, it was like $500, and one mobile home teardown would fill up the dumpster. And sometimes the garbage company, they want to pick up the dumpster every Tuesday, like they said. So we have to constantly call them, and if they don't take out the dumpster, we have delays and teardowns, and that's what I experienced a lot of. And having lights throughout 55 acres, that's a fixed expense. The water bill, 55 acres, it's a high expense, and just a lot of like tree trimming. When I took over the park, I had to tear down like 8 trees, and these are like 100-foot trees or 55 acres. And if it's near the power lines, the power companies will take it down. So we had to call the power company to remove some trees. But then there's trees that were like near the home that were like about to fall. So I had to spend around like I think $6,000 to get rid of all those trees. So I was pretty big expense there. I underestimated that definitely. And so basically, you're collecting like $6,000 in rent, but you have a lot of fixed expense between the property manager, you have a part-time maintenance guy, you have security, you have the excavator, the lawnmower, utilities, electric, the water, garbage. So you can start to see there's a lot of fixed expenses that sort of accumulate, but only 30 out of 200 lots are occupied. If it was 200 out of 200 occupied, the fixed expense still stay the same. So that's where you get the economies of scale as you start to infill the park. But in the beginning, you're biting in the negative initially. So we started that, and obviously once the tenants start seeing that you're renovating these vacant homes, they're gonna put in a lot of requests, right? So I had 15 park owned homes. They started to say, hey, we want the roof's leaking over here. We want skirting on our thing. So, start getting more requests to touch up the current park owned homes, and you want to do that. So, because for the good tenants that they're paying. And then when I came on board, I had to start evicting, about 10 tenants. It was unfortunately during COVID, and it was very hard to evict people in Alabama. Like anytime I tried to evict somebody in a park owned home, they would claim that they got COVID. So because of that, it would delay again. So, it just took a while to evict some tenants. And eventually it just got to the point where it just said, hey, like, I did cash for keys almost, where I'll just pay you, um, you know, $300. It's going to cost me $600 to get an attorney, and then you give me the keys, and we call it even, right? So that was actually more effective in Alabama. But the hard one was trying to evict the tenant-owned homes, because one tenant-owned home tenant didn't pay rent for like a year from the prior owner, and they were paying like I think 100 or $200 a month in lot rent. And it was going to cost me like $800 to evict them, and they just kept on claiming COVID, COVID, COVID. to the point where it was delayed almost like a year. So I just thought, well, I thought Alabama was landlord friendly, but it was very challenging to evict people. I felt like it was almost like California, whereas in Oklahoma, 15-day notice, someone gets evicted, right? So I was a little bit humbled by that, and that was on me that I didn't do more research as to the eviction process in Alabama. All right, so that was definitely on me, and my offsite property managers didn't really know as well how to kind of evict and what that process entailed. So it became a challenge, and once one tenant doesn't pay, like people know that, oh, like I'm not going to pay either, right? So it kind of like cascades, unfortunately. So it was a lot easier for me to either evict or negotiate cash or keys with the park owned homes, but it was very challenging to evict and get rid of people who own their homes, and that process. So that was kind of my experience in the southeast. Obviously, if you're like in a better mobile home park market, like like California, for example, it's all tenant owned homes, and um, it's usually these tenants will pay a little more lot rent. So, it just kind of almost felt the same, right? Like it was kind of like lower end tenants. And another thing I realized too is like a lot of these tenants, like you try to raise, like if some tenant was paying $200, the market lot rent was for a new home was 300, so 250 was the middle. If you try to raise it, they're like very resistant to it, like out the gate. So you want to fix things up first and then slowly raise it. But like for them, $25 a month is a lot of money for them, right? Because they're on fixed income. So, that's another barrier that you're gonna have to go through as well that I went through. And so basically that's kind of at a high level what happened. So when I hit the ground running, basically a lot of reality hit, and you want to get all your ducks aligned, and now you have a huge, huge, huge renovation team that you're managing. So if you found value from this part, and hope to see you in part 5. Welcome back to my mobile home park series. I hope you found value from the first 2 videos. This is part 3 of my mobile home park series. So in this one, I want to talk about how I did my due diligence. So for me, fortunately, the property manager actually came with the mobile home park. So they were currently managing it for the current owner. And obviously, they would still come on as the property manager for me as the new owner. So I'll definitely talk about the pros and cons of doing that. As you've heard, there's not very many good third-party property management companies for mobile home parks. That's why a lot of the big mobile home park syndicators, they end up doing it in-house. And typically that branch of their department usually doesn't make money at all. It kind of breaks even or slightly negative. But the reason for that is there's not that many great third-party operators out there. And, for some context, this operator, they manage 70 mobile home parks, predominantly in the Southeast. And they basically provide the offsite management. So they have like, I think 7 offsite property managers, and then the offsite property manager will then manage the onsite property manager who's actually there that's living in the park. So it's kind of like a 3-layered system. So I, as the owner, would talk to the offsite property manager, and the offsite property manager would talk to the onsite property manager, and then the onsite property manager would then coordinate all of the general contractors and handyman if we're doing renovation. In my park, as I mentioned earlier, there was like 50 vacant parkland homes, so obviously it's a huge, huge renovation project. So that was kind of the infrastructure. From that, do these checks and balances. What I was hoping was the third party operators, obviously they manage 70 parks. They know the Southeast very well. They've been in the business for 30 years. So as a result, obviously I just said, okay, well, I have while I'm new to mobile home parks myself, minus a few, maybe 100 hours of podcast, I have someone who's been in the business for 30 years. So, hopefully they can, hold my hand and guide me. And, obviously they're the ones managing the day-to-day operations. In another video, I'll kind of share my experience about that. But so because of that, it kind of helped me, do the due diligence. If you do Frank and Dave's boot camp, they have a due diligence checklist. Obviously I had a really large checklist as well. So, I submitted the letter of intent. In Alabama, it's an attorney title state, so they don't have title companies. It's all done through attorneys there. So I submitted my LOI, actually got it accepted. I negotiated credit financing terms that I mentioned earlier, 10% down, 5% interest only for a 6-year hold. And I was able to defer the first year of interest payments and add that onto the back end of the loan because I knew I was going to spend a lot of money fixing up the park. So, that was my rationale, and the buyer was okay with that. So once I got under contract, I had a 30-day due diligence period and then 15 days to close after that. So it's a 45-day close. It's pretty fast because I'm seller financing it. There's no lender needed. So obviously for due diligence, you want to do a lot of stuff, remotely. I'm out of California. It's in Alabama. So the initial reports that we do was number one, we did a ghost ad. So that's just posting like an ad on Craigslist. You can do it on Facebook Marketplace, and you just want to gauge the market, right? So we had 2 ads. One was to sell the home for around maybe $40,000 to $45,000. So that's a new home. And then we also had an ad to sell a home that was, maybe around $20,000. So these are for the used homes. And then we had an ad to rent the home, a new home. So, through those ghost ads, what we found out was there's a lot of rental demand. Alabama is a renter's market, unfortunately. In mobile home parks, they always suggest the park-owned home models. Every syndicator does park-owned homes, but in the Southeast, you're typically going to start off with a park-owned home model. So you're going to be managing the homes, you're going to fix them up and then rent them out, and then eventually transition them to a rent-to-own model. And then, the rent-to-own model is basically, let's just say your rent's $500, right? And I'm going to sign a rent-to-own contract with you. So you're going to pay $550 a month. And that $50 extra will be applied to you owning the home. So you do that for 5 years, and they complete the 5-year contract, then you own the home and you just pay me lot rent of, $200 or $250 a month, right? So that's the kind of the model you have to use in Alabama. And that's what I learned through my experience after owning it for 15, months. So, the ghost ad did well in terms of rental, a lot of Section 8 demand. Like I called Section 8, the HUD department, and they literally have a wait list of people wanting to get into homes. And I actually had some demand for people wanting to buy homes, right? So the ghost ad did well. But take the ghost ad with a grain of salt because a lot of people will show interest about wanting to rent. A lot of people show interest in wanting to buy. A lot of people show interest in wanting to rent to own. But how many people can actually execute it and go through with it? So just take it with a grain of salt. But I did a ghost ad, and all the results look great, right? So that checked off for me. The next one was the financials. So, obviously they use Rent Manager. So I was able to get a profit and loss statement, a T12, a recent rent roll, as well as a delinquency report. And, obviously when a park is getting ready to be sold, a lot of times what the owners will do is they'll cut down their expense significantly to make the park look a little bit better. So I experienced that. Obviously, like the expenses were a lot less than when I took over the park. My expenses were way more, way more. So I was a little bit, disappointed about that, but that's on me at the end of the day. That I do that due diligence. But basically, there's a lot of tenants who weren't paying. There are tenants who were living in the tenant-owned homes, so they weren't paying their lot rent, and there were some tenants who were not paying, and basically, they were not paying the rent either. And then the property managers, of course, were saying, well, hey, it's the owner's fault. Like they're too cheap to want to evict the tenants. But more of that lesson later. um, but basically, what I came to realize is, more on that a little bit later. And then from there, basically, so obviously, when I come in, I knew I was going to have to evict a lot of people. The park-owned homes, I'd evict them. The tenant-owned homes, it's a lot longer of a process to evict someone when it's their home that they own, which is what people don't talk about. Obviously, if it's their home that they own, and let's say they owe you, whatever, $1,000 in lot rent, you're gonna have to go through the eviction court and basically put a lien on the house. And then once they leave, the house gets sold, and then once the house is sold, you get paid off your lien. So it's a lot of work, right? Like, for some context, like someone might owe me $1,000, but it was going to cost me like $800 to literally, evict them. So it's almost not worth it. So, for me, I just said, hey, like I'm the new owner. Let's just start you on a clean slate. If you pay me moving forward on time for like 3 months straight or 6 months straight, I'm gonna remove that back debt and call it fresh start. Right. So that was my strategy going in. And then so obviously, when you get started mobile home parks, a lot of people are like, oh, I want all tenant owned homes. I want a 10% cash on cash return day one. I want, some empty lots that I can infill. And yeah, that sounds great. But when, as a new mobile park operator, you're not going to find those deals, right? Like all those good deals get passed to large operators. For a new beginner, they're not going to bring you those deals. You're going to have to get stuck with these huge value add parks. But if you can do it, you can make a lot of money, right? So a lot of people like always like all the mobile park forums I'm in, they're like, oh well, I want a 10 cap, 10% catch return day one, all 10 owned homes, and maybe like 20, 30 lots I can infill. And upside to increase the lot rents. Yeah, if that deal's out there, it would not go to me. It would go to a large operator. It was not going to go to someone like me who owns one or two mobile parks, right? So as the reality, that got bursted for me. So I just said, well, this is what you have to do. You're going to have to buy a really distressed park, a lot of park owned homes, and then convert them to tenant owned homes. To take a lot more effort, a lot more time. So, like you said, you can prove the model and then flip it to a larger syndicator once that you've done the model, right? So you don't have to bring the park all the way and you still make money. Um, so from there, I did, let's see what else. They gave me all the paperwork. So they gave me utility bills, electric bill, the water bill. And then for me, I did an on-site visit with the due diligence expert from the property management. So I basically flew over to Alabama. It was a 3-day trip. Um, I was on site for like 3 days, so I can kind of explore the city, get a sense of the city. I walked the park. So when I was at the park, what I did was I had general contractor there, the due diligence guy was there, and then the on-site property manager was there, as well as the maintenance guy. So we had a team of 4, and what we did was we walked through all the currently occupied homes. So we saw the 15 tenant-owned homes, the 15 park-owned homes, and we also walked through all the vacant park-owned homes, so I can get quotes on how much it was going to cost to fix each one. So, it would range from, if it was more cosmetic, light, it was maybe $2,000. If it was a full rehab, it was probably around $10,000. And then we would allocate, okay, lot 50A, it's going to cost this much to fix it up. Lot 60A, this one needs to be torn down, and to tear down a home, it costs roughly around $2,000, $2,000 to $3,000. Between you get to rent an excavator to tear it down, you have to pay labor to throw it in a trash can, and pay the trash can company to take it away. So it's a lot of work there. And then basically we looked at during the walkthrough, we noticed that there were some sewage issues. They have Orangeburg piping, which breaks down over time. So we knew we had to replace, like, I think 500 feet of sewer piping with PVC, which is a lot more durable. So that was going to cost like $10,000. There, we actually went to like Section 8 housing, and I found out that there's a long wait list, like of like 80 people who need housing, and we actually visited around, I think, 20 apartment complexes nearby, neighboring mobile home parks, and at all the apartment complexes, they were all full, all rent out to Section 8, and they had a wait list. So I knew that there was demand, and all the apartments are only 1 and 2 bedroom. So I knew there was a huge demand for a 3-bedroom. I went to the sheriff's department to ask about the crime for the area. So, typically the sheriffs are a little bit more negative, but, in Alabama, where the mobile park was, it was unfortunately a little bit higher crime area. But after talking to the sheriff, he did mention that, there used to be a lot of gang activity, surrounding that park. Obviously when you have a lot of empty park owned homes and a lot of like 55 acres of land, a lot of sketchy things happen, like drug deals, gang activity. So basically I was trying to build a relationship with the sheriff department saying, hey, like, would it be okay if I use we have an office there, like, could you set out some of your officers there? We'll give you some, donuts, some coffee, some refreshments, some snacks, a computer, so you can, work on your reports there. And, they just said, yeah, we'll consider that option. And then we just basically asked like, oh, like, do you guys like drive through the park around the area? Do you do surveillance? And typically they always say yes. And he did say that, that area was high in crime, but, it did improve over the past 5 years because either those gang members were in jail or they were shot and killed, unfortunately. So from there, I basically said, okay, great. And after that, I went to the county to talk about, what it would take to, because 55 acres is quite a bit. You can average around 6 homes per acre. So that's potential to be, it's 55 acres. So what's 300 lots plus? So there's a potential to add 100 extra lots. So I went to the county to ask like, okay, what would it take to add additional lots. And it was fortunately a very simple process, but obviously I have 170 lots to fill currently, so this is thinking like 5 to 10 years down the line. So I knew there was upside on that end. So basically that took around 3 days. I would drive through the park throughout multiple times a day, early in the morning, middle of the day, at nighttime, just to see how the area was, to see if it was well lit, to see if there's any kind of sketchy activity going around. And then I would drive around the town. There's a super Walmart there, which is, really popular. Walmart is typically a big supplier of jobs. A lot of people will work there. So actually going around the town, uh, the city was roughly had a population of, I think, 20 to 30,000. It was about 45 minutes away from Montgomery, Alabama, which is a population of 200,000. So that's what you want to be. You want to be near something larger. So, I basically went through that. And at the end, we created a little plan where I was going to have to spend around $300,000 to fix up the homes, about $10,000 to fix the sewer piping issue. So I would need roughly around $300,000 to $400,000 to fix up the park. And oh boy, was I the estimate wrong. So after that, I felt comfortable with. Oh, I forgot. Since there was a gas station nearby the mobile home park, I actually did a phase 1 environmental study. Because there's no lender in the deal, it wasn't required. But I just want that to have assurance that it was okay. It's like I view it as like an insurance policy. It's only about, I think it costed me $1,500 to do it. It's a 1-day survey, and they basically did an analysis saying that there's no risk of hazardous residue from the gas station. So I have that, right? So what's great about that is if I were to sell my park, I can hand that report over to the potential buyers to say, hey, it's clean. The phase 1 study is clean, right? So I did that as like insurance policy as well as proof. So after doing all that, I came home, basically wrote out a pro forma plan, and my goal was to, fix up about 2 or 3 homes per month, renovating it, and then I can rent it out. So basically, I would have a team of 5 people, about 4 to 5 handyman that was paying on an hourly basis to fix up the homes. We'd fix up roughly around 2, 3 homes a month. We'd start with the easier homes first, and then later we'd go to the the heavier lift homes that costed $10,000. And if I can fix up 2 homes per month, so it's going to cost me about $5,000 to $20,000 a month, depending on how big the renovation was. They were going to fix it up, and we rent it out, and then in about a year, basically this park would be cash flowing pretty decently. So that was kind of my plan going in. So this is it for this part of the video. I just want to give a highlight as to my due diligence and what my plan was. So hopefully you found value. I hope you see you in the next video. Thank you so much. So welcome back to the Mobile Home Park series. This is actually part 6. So in part 6, I want to talk about my interaction and time commitment with my offsite property manager. So as I described in my first video, the structure is I would talk to the offsite manager, who is actually based in California. They manage about 70 mobile home parks in the Southeast, and they kind of are used to doing larger turnaround parks like mine, where you're fixing a lot of vacant park-owned homes and then doing a lot of teardowns and infilling a lot of homes. So they're actually very big advocates of the park-owned home model. They actually like it better versus the tenant-owned home models. I'll kind of give my opinion on that in a later video. But for in Alabama, it's definitely a renter's market. So the best that you can do is put someone on a rent to own, um, you know, lease, for example. So, for example, if the rent was $500, typically I'd put them at 550, an extra $50 a month, and you would do like a 5-year contract. So in a year, it's $600. Over 5 years, that's $3,000, and basically that's enough to basically take over the house, and they would then pay me lot rent of $250 a month, for example. But unfortunately, it sounds great to say, and when you hear on podcasts and whatnot. But the reality is, the chance of them actually making through the 5 years on a rent to own lease, it's very rare, because the moment something major breaks down, they basically it gets kind of gray, where like they technically should fix it, but if they don't, and let's say they were to leave, you end up getting stuck to fix it anyway. So it's kind of this weird mix where like ideally they should fix it, but if they don't, I mean, if they leave and they break the contract, at the end of the day, you're stuck fixing that unit, right? So it's the ones that do make it, great, but your success rate, I'd say, is probably like 10 to 20%. Like you said, once you're a renter, the mentality is different versus being a homeowner. And this rent to own model, it sounds great to say, but the success rate is so limited, right? Like it's just a different mentality. These people might get laid off, they can't afford the extra $50, and they'll leave. Something major breaks, like I said earlier, they don't want to deal with it. Like, wow, I don't want to pay $300 for a new oven, or I don't want to pay for like a new fridge, or my roof's leaking, I don't want to pay for this. And even though I have like a handyman on site that they could pay to have it fixed, like it's a different mentality, right? To do that. So you have to get comfortable with managing those park owned homes, and having systems in place to do that. So that's just kind of been the reality. So what I did was I actually had weekly touch base calls with my offsite um, property manager. Seems I kind of went on a side tangent there, but I would talk to my offsite manager, who would then talk to my on-site manager. Then my on-site manager would then talk to my renovation crew. So it's multi-layered, right? But what I'm learning and what I'm teaching my students now is the more uh, points in a process, the more points of failure. So there's communication from me to my offsite manager. If there's a delay, if there's a 1 day delay, that's there's a delay there. And then from my offsite manager to my onsite manager, there's a delay there. And then my onsite manager to my renovation crew, there's a delay there. So let's say there's a 2 day delay between each point. That's 8 days of delay, right? So by the time I say something to when it actually gets done, it might be like 8 days. So more points in the process, more points of failure, more points of delay, right? So you can see it right there. So I would talk to my offsite manager only on a weekly basis. I would not bypass them and talk to my onsite property manager, to not create mixed messages. You want a consistent message at all times. So I would talk based on a weekly basis, and I would get updates about the park. Obviously, since I'm doing heavy renovation and value add, I want to know what the updates are, what are the issues. I'd get my monthly reports on usually the third week of the month. I would get all my reports through Rent Manager. More on that later down the road. And then from there, I would get updates and make quick decisions for them. So they would ask me like, so even despite having like two property managers, you still are heavily involved. So I'd probably spend around, maybe it was about 30 to an hour every Friday morning that we'd have a touch base call. And what I would do is actually would take notes myself, and I would have imagine like a meeting, right? I'd have meeting minutes, and then I would have action items to follow up on to hold my offset property managers accountable. And I kind of threw them off a little bit because they probably weren't used to having, them being held accountable. Number one, and number two is like having an owner this engaged. Like they straight up told me that like I'm probably one of the most engaged owners ever, and it's supposed to be passive, but from my experience, and it proved to be right. Like only the owner will care about their park as much as them, because I'm literally writing the checks every month of $20,000-$30,000 a month to renovate these homes, right? And for them, they're just telling someone it's just a W-2 job for them, right? So they're not as invested, they don't have as much skin in the game as I do. So of course I'm gonna be more engaged, right? I don't want to sit back because unfortunately you have to light fire under them, and it's proven. Like in the beginning, I went every week, held them accountable, and then we started lowering the frequency, like to every 2 weeks, to every month, and guess what happened? They started dropping the ball because, unfortunately, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So that's why I learned from this part that's proven. Like you have to be in their ear on a weekly basis. Even if it's not a 30-minute call, whether it's like a text, 5-minute touch base, you can keep it really short. But the key is you want to have frequent communication so you're like fresh of mind, because they're managing, my offsite's managing 10 parks, right? So she has 10 owners coming at her doing that. So, I want to be on top of mine, and mine's the biggest project, right? I'm spending a lot of money. So I'd get those monthly reports to the rent manager. So I'd get my profit and loss statement, my rent roll, my delinquency report, all these reports that rent manager does. And then for there, basically they would then, my offsite manager would have a weekly calls with my onsite manager, and then my onsite manager would reach out to my offsite to authorize like anything that needs to be paid for or request. And then the onsite would then coordinate with my renovation team. So, like I said, there's a lot of moving pieces, and my offsite, so I would pay them a monthly fee, and then I'd pay my onsite manager, a monthly, fee as well as they get free rent living there. So, there's just a lot of moving pieces. So for me, I like doing the weekly to stay on top of mind, but also as an opportunity for me to help and learn and help get creative ideas, right? Because like at the end of the day, they have to kind of listen to you as the owner, but I'm newer in the business and they've been in the business a lot longer. Like I think the property management company, they've been in it for like 30 years, and his daughter was actually managing my park, and she's been in the industry for about like 20 years as well. So I think they're highly experienced in that, but at the same time, it's different to be an investor versus like a property manager. I think the owner of the property management company, he owns, I think, 10 mobile parks himself in the Southeast, which I liked. But what I kind of learned was the the head guy that you talk to, like they're usually great, but usually the regional uh, property managers, who are the 10 of them, they're not usually as great, right? They're usually like W-2 employee, very minimal mentality. So, um, when you're working with the mobile home park industry, fortunately, you kind of have to be, really tough and hold people accountable and hold people to deadlines. And I think my offsite, she struggled with that a little bit. I think she was a little bit too nice. She was on the nicer end. And, I can't blame her. That's just your personality, right? But when you're dealing with, this on-site manager that you're paying $2,000 a month, they're not going to be as educated. You're going to have to be a little tougher on them. And, unfortunately in the Southeast, they may not respond as well. Like guys may not respond as well to females. So sometimes I had to leverage the owner, who was, a guy. He had a very loud, booming voice to like get them motivated to do stuff. So it's almost kind of like a good cop, bad cop routine, where like the offsite would be the good cop, and then occasionally I had to bring in the owner, who was the bad cop, to light fire underneath my on-site manager to get them to work faster and do what they're supposed to do, right? So you need like a good balance, and that's what I like about that. And I would have weekly calls, and kind of lesson that I learned was, when you take over a park, they're already managing it for the current owners. And when I bought it, I retained them on as well, because it was part of the purchase contract that they would retain it, and they knew the park, so they would know what to do. But kind of the downside of that, and I never do this for my apartments, is they were saying that, oh, the other owners weren't, like, they were too cheap to evict the tenants that weren't paying, right? So I just said, okay, well, I have money allocated, I'll evict the tenants. But then what I quickly came to realize was that they just didn't know how to evict the tenants, right? Like maybe the owner was probably too cheap to do it, but they were probably just throwing blame at the prior owner, saying that he was a bad operator, not us. But in my mind, I'm like, well, you're the property manager. Like, I get it. They're just saying we're stuck. Like, we want to evict these people. We had everything set up, but the other owner didn't want to pay. So I just said, okay, that makes sense. But I'm willing to pay. But I was willing to pay, but they didn't know how to like evict the tenants. Like, and there's a lot of like, I think some changes where we had a judge, and the judge wanted us to follow a certain procedure, and for some reason the on-site manager, they're not very educated. Like you said, most of them don't like graduate high school, for example. So it requires the offsite manager, and then I just kept on getting this like beater on the answer, to the point where like I felt like I just had to call the courthouse directly and ask for the process. And that's why I kind of figured, working with these property managers, like some of them, like they just on-site doesn't know what to do. The off-site's not willing to take like ownership and do it. So I, as the owner, would step in and be like, I'll call them and do that. And they weren't used to that. But I just said that, well, if you were doing your job appropriately, I wouldn't do it. But because you're not doing it and I'm spending money to operate this park, I'm going to do it, right? It's going to take me like a 30-minute phone call. I'm going to call like the eviction court and ask like, hey, how does the process work? And then do that, right? So I was able to get that, but unfortunately with COVID, it was around COVID time, it just kept on getting, the court date kept on getting pushed back, right? Like, oh, we're backed up in the court. Let's push it back. Oh, a court date's on October. Someone in my family has COVID. I can't go. More delays, right? So it just took forever and forever to get things delayed. So that was a little bit humbling experience for me. I thought Alabama was a little more landlord friendly than that. But given COVID and all the situation, there was just a lot of room for delay, and I just felt like it was like California, right? Like Oklahoma might evict someone in 15 days, regardless of COVID or not, right? It's easy. So that was there, and then the property manager, this is all property managers. They start off great. They send all the reports on time. And I'm actually experienced in my 20th unit as well. Like, on the first couple of months, they're on time, and later they get lax. Like, oh, they don't send you the report. They don't send you the report. They don't send you the report. And you get to kind of probe them, and they'll give you every excuse under the moon as to why they can't give you the report on time. But to me, like a strong property manager, they will give you the reports on time, right? Like my 20 unit, I don't even have to ask them. Like the first of the month, like for example, in March, it's March now. I got my February reports already. It's like March 4th. Right, most property managers would want like till the third or fourth week of March before you get your February reports, and even then, like they don't provide it on time. I have to prompt them to do it to via email, and usually when I email them, they'll give it to me. But basically, property managers start to kind of slip up a little bit, and I was definitely noticing that as well. But for me, I had a Wells Fargo account, so I could track my income and my expenses in real time. So that kind of helped me see like how much we were spending, how much rent I was collecting. And then another struggle that I went was with collections. Like these tenants, like my offsite manager was too soft on my onsite manager, who was too soft on the tenants to collect rents. So I just said, well, I'm basically paying both of you guys to collect the rents, and if you can't do that, what's the point of having an offsite and an onsite property manager, right? Like they don't quite understand that. And I just said, we have to collect rent. So what we did was we had to leverage the security guard to start collecting rent for us to create more intimidation. And I said, it takes a certain personality to knock on someone's door. To collect the rent. Fortunately, my property manager, he was really good at renovations, but he wasn't great at collecting rent. So that's just kind of the nature of the business. Like I think the wife was great at collecting rent. She was a little bit more of a bad cop, but she got injured and she couldn't do that anymore. So I had to leverage my security guard to knock on the door and be the bad cop to collect the rent. So unfortunately, if you have someone that can do both renovation and be kind of the bad cop to collect the rent, you have the perfect person. If you're paying them, $2,000 a month, right? That's the best you can get. So, I'd have weekly cadence calls, and as the owner, I never like to be the bottleneck in the business. I always respond timely with that to remove barriers. So, kind of lessons I learned is, when you have an offsite manager and an onsite manager and a crew that is renovating, when you communicate something to your offsite, by the time it gets to the actual crew who's doing the work, it might be like a 1 week delay at least. And when you play telephone, the message gets misconstrued as well. And even despite having offsite, onsite property manager, like my mobile park, I was the most active. I spent the most time, the most energy on that compared to my 2 apartment complexes that I own, my 46 units that I'm renovating. Like those are a lot more passive, a lot more simple. I just, in the beginning, I touch base with them once a week. Now I just text them for an update and they'll give me the update. Usually on Fridays, they know I'm going to text them and they'll give me their update. But for the mobile park, I was very engaged. Like sometimes I had to do their job for them. Like I would step in and be like, okay, let me figure out this eviction process. So it's very common. Like don't expect it to be fully passive. Like mobile park, you can make a lot of money, but you're going to put a lot more capital in. You're going to put a lot more time in. But you can make a lot of money if you do it, right? So, more money, more work. And the next point is they will never care as much as their park as you do. So they don't have skin in the game, right? Like my offsite manager, she gets paid the same, regardless if she does anything or does a lot. On-site manager gets paid the same, regardless if he does anything or not. That's a W-2 fallacy, right? Whether you actually work or not, you get paid the same every month, right? So as a result, you have to constantly be on top of them. You have to constantly be educating yourself about mobile home parks. So even when I bought the park and throughout owning the park, I was listening to a lot of content on mobile home parks, learning, because you need to trust but verify your offsite manager. I initially assumed that since they operate mobile home parks for 20, 30 years, they would be teaching me. That's not the case. You have to ask them the right questions and then they'll answer you and teach you. And sometimes some of the questions I was asking, they never even knew. So, like I said, you always have to stay educated. You cannot assume that they're going to teach you everything. While it's nice to say, like, that's what appealed me towards them. Like, hey, you've been in the business 30 years, you can teach me. But, they don't care as much as you do. So you got to, like, still ask the right questions and probe and get the ball rolling whenever you can. So, hopefully, you found value from this video and hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.